So I believe it's time to open this webinar. If you scroll up, yeah, perfect. So welcome to our webinar, Understanding the Diversity of Protected Areas with the MPA Guide and a Smart Solution for Effective Ocean Protection. This event is organized by a series of partners, UNWCMC, IUCN World Commission on Protected Area, the National Geographic Pristine Seas Program, the Oregon State University, Protected Planet, and Marine Protection Option. My name is Carole Martinez. I'm Policy Manager at MPA, and if you allow me, maybe to set the scene, I will share a few words about our organization. Next, please. Next. So MedPAN is a Mediterranean network of marine protected area managers with strongly committed members and partners. It's a dynamic human cooperation network that works at the Mediterranean scale and that is transcending all the political barriers. It's a science-based learning and adaptive organization with a bottom-up approach. Next, please. Next, perfect. The organization gathers 131 organization, members and partners in 21 countries, and it brings together more than 190 marine protected areas. Next, please. You will see on the map what we are talking about. Next. Next slide, please. So our vision is targeting healthy marine and coastal ecosystems under decreasing threats and with an appropriate protection both in the Mediterranean Sea and in the global seas in order to provide sustainable goods and services for the well-being of the present and future society. Next one, please. Our mission, as you can understand, is to actively contribute to achieve a representative, connected, integrated, and effectively managed system of marine protected areas through a strong and active network of Mediterranean marine protected area managers and other actors, and this at all levels. And our mission aims also to increase knowledge and capacities of marine protected areas while improving the awareness, the MPA policy implementation, and the funding. Next one, please. So our work is organized through three main pillars. The first one is dealing with the capacities and solution sharings. The second one is aiming at building MPA knowledge for the management and the decision making. And the third one is willing to develop and promote MPA policies in the Mediterranean and beyond. Next one. As you can see, MedPAN works on various topics ranging from sustainable tourism, climate change, mobile species, pollution, but as well sustainable small-scale fisheries and obviously management effectiveness. Next one. And to do so, MedPAN support policies on different levels, all the relevant levels, from the local to the international level. So this gives you a bit an overview of what MedPAN is and what we are doing. Next one, please. And next, it's time now to go through our agenda and to discover more who will be our dear panelists. So we will start to hear more about the MPA guide with Dr. Kirsten Grorud-Colver, as well Dr. Paolo Giudetti. And then we will have the great pleasure to hear more from four panelists with very diverse but exciting and relevant background and experience. We will deepen the discussion with a question, and please prepare your question. And then we will have the pleasure to give you more information where to find MPA guide resources. Next one. So our panelists, as I indicate, will be today Samantha Makovac, Senior Nature Conservation Advisor at the Strunian Landscape Park in Slovenia, Charles Loiseau, who is a researcher at the IOB in France, Zafer Kizil-Gaillard, who is the president of the Mediterranean Conservation Society in Turkey, and Paolo Giuditti, the research director of Genoa Marine Center in Italy. Next one. I think it's time now to hear more about the MPA guide. And over to you, Dr. Kirsten Growood-Colbert. Please.
Hello, thank you so much, Carol. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm delighted to give a brief overview of some of the work that we've been doing with the MPA Guide. I'm a professor at Oregon State University and very glad to be here representing very many people who are co-authors and contributors and part of the network that is the MPA Guide. Next slide, please. So we're here today because I would guess all of us have seen changes in the ocean. We've seen how they are affecting our communities and our ecosystems, the places that we love and use and want to continue benefiting from in the future. And we know that many are making decisions about this, including our governments and our leaders. So we talk about MPAs a lot. Next slide, please. Because we need multiple solutions and very many are in discussion. But next slide, please. MPAs are what we're going to focus on today. And in your work, in your expertise, many of you focus on these areas. They're valuable because they've been established and studied extensively around the world. The World Database on Protected Areas says there are more than 18,000 MPAs around the world. And they're also counted as progress towards international targets for biodiversity. So for example, the new global biodiversity framework of the Convention on Biological Diversity set target 3, which is to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030, and MPAs are being counted towards that 30%. Next slide, please. So what we set out to do was to convene an inclusive, collaborative, consultative process where we could look at the state of the science about marine protected areas and help to better understand what makes these areas effective. How do we know when to count a marine protected area as progress towards biodiversity conservation and global policy targets? How do we know how to do this? So we worked together with many, and that input resulted in a scientific paper in the journal Science with 42 co-authors from more than 20 countries and a suite of resources. Next slide, please. What we did is we looked across different species around the world, data from these different species. We also looked at different habitats around the world. Next slide, please. And we looked at many different communities and consulted with many different peoples and experts, next slide, who know about these areas. Next slide. So what we resulted in is called the MPA Guide, and there are 4 elements of this. Essentially, the MPA Guide is a way to describe MPA effectiveness, and it allows us to do so to compare MPAs around the world. It identifies the stage of establishment of an MPA. It groups MPAs according to their level of protection. It specifies enabling conditions for effective and equitable MPAs. And it links all these to the likely outcomes that can be expected for an MPA based on its level of protection. And so I'm going to take a moment to go through each of these as an overview. So first of all, the stages of establishment. Essentially, what this does is gives us 4 general categories so we can track the progress of an MPA all the way from when it's proposed and committed through to when it's actively managed. And this is important because a site that's proposed or committed is an idea, people are working towards it. A site that is designated is now established through legal or traditional means. So for example, it has defined boundaries or legal gazetting. But importantly, to be implemented is when an MPA is active in the water. And this is when we would want to count it as progress towards biodiversity conservation. Right now, for example, there are MPAs in the world database that are only designated. So they're not active in the water, but they are being counted already as progress towards the target. And so we need to take a careful look at this. And then, of course, active management is the goal and the process and the journey for every MPA to the point of ongoing monitoring, community engagement, evaluating how the management is working, all the things that we know we want to invest in MPAs to be able to understand. So those are the 4 stages of establishment. Next slide, please. The levels of protection are also 4 different categories, and importantly, these rely on an understanding of what different types of activities are happening in an MPA. Next slide, please. So in this circumstance, we recognize that MPAs around the world have many different types of activities that are happening within them. We know that some of those MPAs are fully protected if you look all the way to the right, but some are only minimally or lightly protected. They allow more extractive or destructive activities, while some are highly or fully when only light, very light, or no extractive activities are allowed. Next slide, please. And importantly, the third element is enabling conditions. And these are all the different basically components of an MPA that make it successful. The people, the places, the different types of transparency or engagement, all the social and human side of MPAs that are so crucial for an MPA to work properly. Next slide, please. So, for example, partnership with Indigenous communities, other rights holders and stakeholders, long-term financial support, political commitment and monitoring, and collaboration, transparency, communication, and accountability. Next slide, please. All of these are linked to the outcomes. Next slide. And importantly, we know a lot about the outcomes from the many studies around the world. These are tied to level of protection and the enabling conditions. And some of these ecological outcomes are biodiversity conservation, what we're aiming for, but also fisheries yield in areas outside, water quality, increased carbon stores, climate resilience. And we also have human well-being outcomes as well. Being able to protect culturally important species and places and perspectives, fisheries catches, alternative livelihoods, income, and stakeholder empowerment, just to name a few. Next slide. So essentially what this lets us do when we think about global or local or regional reporting is to look across the levels of protection like you see on the left, and stage of establishment like you see on the bottom. And each of those cells, really, each of those boxes can correspond to an understanding of how much of the ocean is protected in that category. Next slide, please. And what this allows us to see is that those at the upper right that are fully or highly protected or implemented or actively managed are the ones that are really going to have the greatest outcomes, the greatest impacts, and the greatest benefits for conservation and for people. Next slide. So finally, this is what we're working towards. When we look at what the ocean had in the past versus what it has in the present, for the future, how our oceans look really depend on decisions that we make about MPAs. So the level of protection that you can understand using the MPA guide, the stages and the enabling conditions, all these are in support of this goal. So today I'm really delighted to hear from our panelists, and I will pass it next to Professor Paolo Guidetti, who will talk about the MPA guide and its relevance in the Mediterranean. Thank you, Paolo.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you so
yeah.
much, Kirsten.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. So I activated my microphone now. And thank you so much for having invited me to make part of this nice webinar. And my name is Paolo Guidetti. I'm the director of the Genoa Marine Center, which is a territorial seat of the Stazione Zoologica Anton Dohrn, an historical institution founded in Naples 150 years ago. And when speaking about the MPAs and the Mediterranean, well, I started working on MPAs more than 20 years ago when I had dark hair and I have now white hair. And I can see for sure that progresses have been made, and a lot of progresses. The next slide, please. So there are many maps available about the distribution of MPAs in the Mediterranean, and the impression one can have looking at the map and the MPAs that are now established in the Mediterranean is that just there is full of MPAs in the Mediterranean. A lot of them, if you count the number that exceed 1,000, but such MPAs are very different in type, in size, in age, in many other factors that are so important for determining the efficiency, the effectiveness of the MPAs, effectiveness in terms of bioecological, but also socioeconomical benefits they may deliver. The next one, please. The Mediterranean is apparently a small, semi-enclosed sea, but it is so variable in terms of gradient from the northwestern part to the southeastern part. So it's the MPAs nowadays established in the Med are located in a continuous matrix of marine water that include actually a huge variety of habitats, coastal, pelagic environments. The next one, please. And the Mediterranean, even though in terms of surface or volume compared to the rest of the ocean is really small, actually it is considered a hotspot of biodiversity because it includes proportionally a lot and a high number of species. Many of them are also endemic, so we can find them just in the Mediterranean, and they are particularly precious for this. And because of climate change, the open of the Suez Canal, etc., many of the species that actually live in the Mediterranean, thrive in the Mediterranean, are non-native. The next one. Such a biodiversity is present in an area, in a basin, which is absolutely different, not only from an environmental point of view, so the gradient of the temperature, productivity, or whatever, but also in an area which is a puzzle in terms of socioeconomical features and geopolitical characteristics. So, and the different countries around the Mediterranean, even though the sea is one, so the different countries have different approaches to marine conservation because of many factors, because of cultural factors, because maybe more or less one half of the Mediterranean is unified in Europe and the rest is not, and for the fact for sure, which is not in detail, that one part of the Mediterranean is subject to very strong tensions and wars. So, and so for these reasons, there are many attempts to coordinate the policy of marine conservation among countries, but for sure there are also huge difficulties. The next one, please. something which is absolutely a common characteristic of the Mediterranean is the fact the Med is one of the most used marine area in the world, because the tourist frequentation, navigation routes, fishing, coastal urbanization can be dramatic in some places. So all this carry the risk to put in difficulty and to expose to erosion. From one side, the biodiversity, which is one of the value of the Mediterranean, but also the cultural diversity, which is something very important to protect in the Mediterranean, which is an area that historically and culturally is super important. And when we know when the biodiversity is to some extent impacted by human impact, the ecosystems are not able to deliver all the services and that normally deliver to human. Okay, I agree. The next one, please. So even though progresses have been made, there is no doubt about this in terms of number of MPAs that have been established in the Med, and also in terms of formal surfaces that have been impacted by conservation from this point of view. If we take into account not only the quantity of the area protected, but also the quality of protection, then such progresses are not so nice as they may appear at the first sight. And there are many evaluations that have been made that have shown that even though the percentage of protection or area protected can be high, for some countries, the 10% by 2020 have been got in terms of objective, the quality of the protection was quite low. And one fraction, non-negligible fraction of MPAs in the Med were actually paper parks. The next one, please. So the seminal paper published some years ago by Claudet and his team provided quantitative evidence that just a small percentage of Mediterranean was protected, but especially a ridiculous fraction of the protected area were actually fully protected. And also something which is dramatic in the Mediterranean is that protection is absolutely unbalanced if one compares the northern part of the Med compared to the southern part. The next one, please. The point is that the MPAs that have been studied have shown that actually once they are well managed, funded, staffed, and enforced, they work very well in terms of benefits they can produce from a bioecological point of view and from a socio-economical point of view. So the positive impacts on biomass of the biological communities, but also on the biomass that can be fished by local fishermen are absolutely higher in the MPAs or close to the MPAs that are properly managed and enforced. So we are encouraged to invest in such a tool because actually it may work. The next one, please. So now we have a challenge to face because basically we have passed the last decade during which actually we failed to achieve the objective to properly, effectively, and equitably establish 10% of protected areas. And now in the next actually in the present decade, we launched a new challenge to protect 30% of the protected areas. So I guess our main challenge now is there is no more time to joke. There is no more time to cheat for some countries that try to a little bit change the terminology so to try to keep declaring surface protected, but not just protected in the water. So I guess from this point of view, the MPA guide and the user manual are actually a fundamental, vital tool we can adopt systematically in all the countries in the Mediterranean. And the point is that using the manual, reading through the manual, one can absolutely catch the fact there is a unified and agreed terminology, unified language. So the MPAs and the different types of MPAs can be defined univocally and unambiguously. So no room for cheating, no room for confusion, no room for keep joking in some cases. So in this decade, I guess our role of researcher, in my case, but also for people involved in marine conservation with different roles, should be supporter, as we did in the past decade, but also referee, being absolutely precise in indicating to policymakers when they do something good, when they do something which is not good. So no room for trying to propose new terminology like protection forte, strong protection in France, just to turn around the fully protection, which is something defined precisely in the user manual and the MPA guide. The next one, please. And just to complete my introduction, I'm trying now to start in the framework of a new project funded by Europe and via the National Biodiversity Future Center in Italy. I'm trying to build a team who is supposed, so in my mind, to apply the MPA guide in the Italian system of MPAs Sensulato, which is composed, the system, by more than 30 national MPAs and more than 20 that are committed, many regional marine protected areas, and hundreds of Natura 2000 sites extending also in the sea. So there is an heterogeneous system of MPAs that may have a great potential, provided that it will be managed, enforced, and staffed and funded properly. And during the next year, I guess we will do our job to try to make it possible for Italy to achieve properly and the target of 30 by 30. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paolo and Kirsten, for this great overview of the MPA guide and particularly what it means and how we can use it in our Mediterranean Sea. So I believe now it's time to move to our panelists and panel to hear more from Samantha to start with. So Samantha, please, over to you. I'll let you introducing yourself. And in terms of practical information, now the translation should be available. Apologize for the little hiccup at the beginning. And in any case, you can use the subtitle option at the bottom of your screen. So over to you, Samantha, please.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you for these nice introductions. So my name is Samantha Makovac. I am working for the Landscape Park Strunjan in Slovenia, which is a state park and a coastal MPA between two big cities that was established 20 years ago and is on the SPAMI list since 2019. My work is mainly in the implementation of the management plan of the MPA project planning, but also a lot of field work. I am coordinating the rangers, monitoring, communication, and other pillars that are important for the park. Next slide, please. In connection to today's webinar, I will try to briefly introduce the park and what we are doing these days. So first of all, the Slovenian Sea represents only a small portion of the Gulf of Trieste, that is the northernmost part of the Adriatic Sea, which is visible also on the map of MapAmed. The surface of the protected sea in Slovenia is nowadays 5.5 but only 0.2% are fully protected areas. We had the Maritime Spatial Plan under development over a few years, and it was adopted in 2021. And the main challenge at the time was, so before the adaptation, was to accommodate multiple interests within a very small space, which I believe is the case in many places in the Med. So the space in Slovenia is really limited on the sea, but it's also very occupied already, and there is no potential for major changes. Also, the expansion of the MPAs that is planned within the Maritime Spatial Plan is set more or less to up to 7%. So we will never reach the target of 30%. The good side of the story is that even though we have a lot of pressure from urbanization and traffic, we still preserve a very good ecological status of the sea. In Strunjan, in my landscape park, for example, we find a high number of species and different habitats, from salt pans to marine lagoon to naturally protected, preserved cliffs and coral underwater reefs. And it's supporting a very high marine biodiversity. Next slide, please. Very briefly, we are, I think it's good to connect with the guides. These days, we are in the middle of the implementation of a 2 years long project that is financed by MedPan and the call of small projects that is titled Amplify 30. So the goal is to really amplify the international commitments on MPA expansion in the Slovenian Sea. Even though as MPA managers, we are not holding the power to for creation of new MPAs, we are running a project this project together with the Institute for Nature Conservation that is consulted on every step, and with the good support from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Spatial Planning. In 1 year till now, so we prepared the expert proposal for the expansion, which is visible, for example, on the map in brief, with a new zonation, new regimes that we would like to apply to improve the conservation status of the Slovenian Sea and to connect the MPA Strunjan with the neighboring MPA, that it's very small for now, but ecologically very important, even more if they are under the same roof of protection. We carried out a consultation with relevant stakeholders. We started first with small-scale fishers, ministries, and other authorities responsible for the MPAs. For now, what I can say is that the participatory process is ensuring that wishes, initiatives, and suggestions are taken into account. And more than anything else, we are trying to find together legal and operational solution to speed up then the official process that will follow after the project. So I think I am running out of my time, and I will give you more details later on if needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Very, very interesting. So without further ado, I will give the floor now to the Dr. Charles Loiseau, who is a researcher at CRIOB, the National Center for Scientific Research in France. Over to you, Charles.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay,
yes,
perfect.
we do.
So good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I'm Charles Loiseau. I'm working at the CNRS, and I'm currently working with the Natural Marine Park of the Gulf of Lion, as well with the reserve of Cerbère-Banyuls for the extension of the reserve and for the implementation of higher level of protection in the Gulf of Lion. But some years ago, I've been involved in these studies about the assessment of the level of protections inside French MPAs and Mediterranean MPAs. And so I'm going to talk a bit more about the Mediterranean MPAs. Next slide, please. So here is a map of the MPA at the time of the study. So there are more than 1,000 MPA in the Med Sea. And if we combine all the stages of establishment or the level of protection, we reach 6% of the coverage, of the total coverage that are currently under protection in the Mediterranean Sea. Next slide, please. So if we keep only the MPAs that are at least designated and the MPA that are at least compatible with marine protection, we fall at less than, I can't see the number, at less than 1% of MPAs under protection in the Mediterranean Sea. So that means that for 95% of Mediterranean MPAs, there are no difference between regulations inside and outside them. Next slide, please. So, and if we only keep the MPAs that are at least fully or highly protected, so that means the MPA for which there are scientific evidence of socio-ecological benefits, we reach the number of 0.23% of Mediterranean Sea under level of protection that ensure benefits for biodiversity and for socio-economical sectors. Next slide, please. So given these results, there have been several commitments from the European Union and for the French government towards higher levels of protection, with a target of 10% of strong protection for France or strict protection for the European Union. And so that translates the need to shift from quantity to quality in marine protected areas. And we need to ensure that this typology of protection, so the strong and the strict protection, needs to be aligned with full and high level of protection in the MPA guide. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Charles, for this overview that give a clear message about the situation in our Mediterranean Sea. Now I will give the floor to Zafer Kizilkaya, President of the Mediterranean Conservation Society in Turkey. Zafer, over to you.
Thank you, Carol. Hi, my name is Zafer Kizilkaya, and probably we are one of the Eastern members of the MedPan in the Mediterranean. I don't want to repeat my colleague says about the MPA guide, the situation in Mediterranean, about the fully and highly protected areas. But before I started, I would like to mention, Paulo, I clearly remember your black hair, so don't worry about it. And I don't want to, the MPAs are living organisms. MPA guide was on agenda of the government who are interested over a couple of years, but MPAs has no luxury to wait and see what's happening in the MPA guide, what's happening, the humans are following the MPAs. But since the MPA guide was active, what's happening in the Mediterranean MPAs and what is the future? There are more, important threats for me. Next slide, please. So, thankfully, in the last 3 years, since 2020, we doubled the fully and highly protected areas in Turkey. Another 35 square kilometers of fully protected areas, another 350 square kilometers of highly protected areas we added. And right now we have almost 10 ranger boats. We have female rangers. We are just trying to protect it every day, day and night. But as the economies get kind of under stress, as the food prices increases and the fish prices increases, as the fish get less and less, and when the MPAs are giving a kind of great opportunity for the people or the illegal activities, now we have serious threats. Next slide, please. So definitely bottom trawling is the #1 threat for all Mediterranean MPAs and also Mediterranean, definitely. So we need to reduce the bottom trawling at least 50% by 2030. These pictures are from 2 months ago. We completed a feature for BBC about the impact of bottom trawling in Mediterranean. It was narrated by Sir David Attenborough, and it will be broadcasted next year in 2025 in May, in 99th birthday of Sir David Attenborough. And, you know, it was just crying. You cannot imagine the impact. You cannot imagine the distraction. So all the doors of bottom trawlers are just scraping entire, you know, these are all illegal bottom trawlers, of course. The Posidonia, Oceanica, all kinds of, you know, unselected fish species. So right now, I'm telling this is one of the most important issue we need to stop in Mediterranean. Next slide, please. And while we are discussing the MPA guide and trying to establish the MPA guide, what happened in just 20 years in Mediterranean? So the left picture is from my archive in 1990s during the days of slides. And the next one is my digital picture exactly from the same place. What happened to this ecosystem? There is no even macroalgae, forget about the fish. So the invasive rabbitfish just boosting the population because of the increasing seawater temperatures. By the way, between 2023 and 2022, the water temperature between surface and 40 meters increased 4 degrees in Turkey. So we lost entire forest underwater. We lost entire species growing inside them, you know, preying on them. So we are talking about huge ecosystem collapse. Next slide, please. Right now, our major work, rather than protecting and doing enforcement, just buying invasive species from fisheries, because right now, almost 80% of the catch in around our MPAs are just invasives. We are just buying tons of lionfish and selling them to dozens of restaurants. We are just buying these invasive species unconditionally from the fishers, otherwise they all stop fishing. So small-scale fisheries is just going to collapse if we don't eat, if we don't consume the invasives. So according to our 10 years of data in our MPA and out of MPA, the increase of invasive species annually in terms of biomass is 2.09. So every year, 2.2% increase in the whole biomass of invasive species within the whole biomass. And according to our data, 30% of the whole biomass will be invasive species before 2030. So this is our situation in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. But as the water temperatures will increase, definitely the Western, you know, colleagues and MPAs will face the same situation. So we are turning into a kind of tropical sea. Next slide, please. But there is a good news. In all our fully protected areas, there is 15% less invasive species in fully protected areas compared to non-protected areas. This means we need more fully protected areas with better management, better enforcement. This is no-brainer because they have bigger fish inside. There are more groupers, more dentex, just territorial chasing or preying on them. So these are the very urgent issues waiting for us in the very coming days. And it's just spreading from Turkey all the way to the west. And look at this. This is an ancient wreck. in fully protected areas, maybe protected by lionfishes, but long spine sea urchins, they are all invasives, but it is still at least 15% less within the fully protected areas. So this is our only hope to save some local biodiversity in the Mediterranean by establishing more and more fully protected areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zafer, and all my warmest congratulations for your great work and achievement in Turkey. Thank you for warning us as well about the reality and the level of emergency in terms of the threats, particularly the question of the bottom trawling and the question of invasive. Actually, we had a discussion at our last annual workshop and discussing with different MPA managers from the western part of the Med. They are aware that it's an issue that they have to really think about, and they are eagerly waiting to share your experience in order to get ready to face this issue of invasive alien species. So I would like to thank very warmly all the panelists for their insight and for having a guest give an appetizer and lead you to have a question. Actually, we had already a question in the chat from Mr. Cyril Michaud, and Samantha kindly answer, but maybe you can quickly take the floor as a question, and Samantha can reply in order to start the Q&A session and part of this webinar. Thank you. Mr. Cyril Michaud, do you want to ask your question? Take the floor.
Oh, so sorry. Yes. Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was some kind of shared governance in the marine protected areas involving not only the discussions, and we understand there were some discussions between the park and the governance, but are there also some other partners involved in the discussions to have the boundaries of the protected areas evolving?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, we started with the fishers, and many things are based on their needs and the situation they have as small-scale fishers and doing this activity for a long time in the park. We connected with them at the beginning, and the cooperation gave us enriched, let's say, the trust that we were able to establish over these years. I will not go into details, but just briefly, we were able to listen to each other over the last 10 years, and we assessed what are their needs and adaptation to the situation in the regime of the park. Mainly because from what I say, there is not much space, there are many interests, and there was between them also a special competition, if I can say like this, between those that are really active and living out of the sea and those that are doing it as almost a side job. So we managed to have a binding agreement, okay, that is based on a public call. We select fishers, we sign a contract, but then also there are obligations on both sides, and there are rangers controlling those obligations and so on. So of course, when we even started thinking about the expansion of the park, they were the first to consult and to see how we can even improve the situation for them, and how we can protect better the areas of the park that are right now either outside the boundaries or under management that it's not very very well, that is not enforced. Okay, for example, the Natura 2000, that it's important as a site, but if it's outside the boundaries of the park, we don't have the power, okay, to maybe to monitor, yes, but to really implement protection regimes, no. And then the success of the park, we believe, in this kind of areas in the Med and even more in Slovenia, is cannot be successful if it's not supported by the inhabitants and the local municipalities. So they were, let's say, the second group of stakeholders we wanted to take on board. And the last one that we would like to highlight, even though we talked to many, is the Maritime Administration that has a good team, you know, big I would say skills and infrastructure to be present on the sea every day, and which the connection with them gave us a lot of thoughts how to then implement also all these new regimes and how this new proposed donation can be really effective. So these are, let's say, the partners that we are consulting even constantly. So besides the expansion, where we wanted to involve, of course, also the ministries and other authorities.
Thank you so much for this first exchange. I see we have 2 new questions. I will give the floor to Mr. Ludovic Mollier in order to let him asking his question related to climate change. Mr. Mollier?
Yes, thank you very much. Just a quick questions regarding the IPCC well-known percentage that 70 to 90% of coral reef will probably disappear if we reach the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. What is the percent?
I think there is an issue of connection.
Okay.
We lost Mr. Mollier. Mr. Mollier, are you still online? No, it seems there was an issue of connection. Maybe we can move to the second question and come back to this very interesting one on climate change later when Mr. Mollier will be back. Mr. Sami Salem, are you online? If so, please ask your question that you would like to Mr. Zafar to address. Understood.
Yes, thank you for hosting me. I am Sami from Libya. My question for Mr. Zafir. Do you think what's happened in your country will be happened in other country around you? And thank you, because we have many protected area, but there is no comprehensive study about this area. And thank you for my hosting again.
Thank you, Sami. Well, last year, the largest lionfish we encountered was about 600 grams. And as of this morning, I just came out of water, the average size is 700, 800. At least 10% of the whole lionfish I saw, in the system right now, inside and outside, are bigger than 1 kilogram. So that means they're getting bigger and bigger. But once you get inside the fully protected areas, within the whole biomass, their percentage is much lower than the non-protected areas. This is important for us for the time being. That means the other local species are still thriving and competing with these invasive species and keeping their strongholds, and do not let them the much higher percentage in whole biomass within the fully protected areas. So the more, but this upcoming 2-3 years are very important, I feel, because they are getting bigger, they're spreading so fast. And some of the local fish species, I counted many last year, totally disappeared this year, where they're being preyed by lionfish or something else. These are all needs a lot of more detailed research, monitoring, but this is a very serious threat. And first time in Mediterranean as of this summer, we will put acoustic transmitters in lionfishes, because we want to know what is their territory and what's happening to them in the winter season. Because in winter season, fishers don't catch any lionfish. Where do they go? Or they don't move at all. So we don't know. So these are all very important for the management of, this invasive species. Because right now we created a huge market for them. We barely, supply enough lionfish for the demand, because it's so delicious. It's so well, known by many chefs in the country's very high-end restaurants. So this is good. But, the economy that this invasive species is going to create will definitely exceed the local species. So we need to get ready for that. And of course, we need to understand more how we can save more local species. Only rabbit fishes just, scrape entire macrophytes, entire microalgae canopies from between surface and 40 meters. So you are losing almost all your vegetations. You're waking up, there is no trees in your country at all. This is happening underwater and nobody's noticing it. Everybody's just looking at, oh, how clear, beautiful blue water. It is not. That's a huge, huge problem. And this is spreading as the water temperatures will increase more and more and more steadily. It will come to, Greece, then to Adriatic, then to Italy, then to France, then to Spain, because lionfish can survive at 10 degrees of Celsius. So it's all about matter of time, right? In the last 2 years, we sold 15 tons of lionfish to the restaurants. Just buying from fishers, just encouraging them to catch and target only the invasives. We are paying good amount of money to them. So that's why, at this, the only way that we can decrease the invasive edible species, just consuming them. And right now, in the big, chain markets like Carrefour, like Metro in Turkey, would like to be part of the project. They are ready to buy the fish from us and display in their, fish markets. So that's why this is a kind of very big initiative. Otherwise, we are just watching these fishes down below. Nobody is paying nothing at all. We just cut one lionfish stomach and 12 lobster, baby lobster came out. I never seen a lobster juvenile, adult size in our MPA, but these guys could spotted 12 tiny itsy bitsy lobsters and ate them. So they are huge, preying pressure on all these local species. So there's a big change in ecosystem here in Eastern Mediterranean. Whether we like it or not, the Eastern Mediterranean is turning into a kind of tropical seas. So how we can stop, or how we can, help the local species still exist with the impact of these invasives. And when the macroalgae finished, you know what happened? What rabbitfish go after? Seagrasses. I didn't know that they can digest seagrasses. They are just, you know, like a scissors, they're just cutting and eating all the seagrasses. So this is a huge threat for Mediterranean. Thank you.
Indeed, Safer, it's quite frightening, but let's try to promote what you have done, for instance, in Turkey, and with the tireless effort, try to mitigate this big threat for marine ecosystem. I see one raised hand and two more questions. So maybe we will start with Emna Ben Lamy, who raised her hand. Please, over to you, Emna.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Hello, everyone. I'm Emna Ben Lamine. I am a postdoc researcher in the University of Côte d'Azur on marine conservation topics. I really liked the guide for the MPAs since 2021, the date it was out. We were waiting for it, actually. And I want to thank Paolo for raising the question of the differences between the Northern Mediterranean and the Southern Mediterranean. And I thought about a question for all the panelists, actually. I think you can all answer it. Can we have a effective Mediterranean marine protected areas without having the law of designation or not? And I'm asking this question because in the South Mediterranean, there are a lot of projects financed, for instance, by METPAN, ongoing on marine protected areas, but we call them marine protected areas to call them this way, but they are not marine protected areas with the law. And I will speak for Tunisia, as I'm Tunisian. The law is very, very hard to get. Like now, for 20 years or more, we are still waiting for the law, and there are still a lot of hinders, a lot of limitations for it. So what do you think about this? And thank you in advance.
Thank you. Who wants to address this tricky legal question?
So I guess,
Paolo?
just as an opinion, but in the sense, it is difficult to answer to this question because, let's say, I'm not an expert in laws, absolutely not, but I see a law like a tool. So if there is another alternative tool to proposing and / impose some rules to manage resources and biodiversity, even if it is something like related to, who knows, protection related to religion or some use or customs locally, they may work as well. For sure, we are used to think about the laws that impose some rules and of coexistence between biodiversity, who has the right to exist, not just the right of humans to exploit nature. Even though we think about sustainability at the end is to exploit something at a given level to allow the resources to be available for the next generations. But it is anyway a point which is really anthropocentric. So law is something, which is related to the cultural roots of a country, but any other tool may work potentially.
Thank you, Paolo. I agree with you and share your insight. Actually, the legal framework is quite instrumental in order to provide the frame and to specify the type of the status, the regulation, the level of protection, and let's say how to make the marine conservation enforcement. Nevertheless, what we witness, not only in our region, but around the world is the existence of protected area that are not necessarily gazetted or even don't exist in the legal and regulatory framework, but nevertheless pragmatically exist because they are created, managed on a daily basis by a local community. And this is the example of the locally marine managed areas. People, communities, population have decided to protect, to conserve part of the land, part of the sea, according as well to their belief, to their religion or their tradition. And this didn't prevent these marine conservation effort to exist. But what has been actually highlighted and underlined at the international level is that they need at some point to have a kind of acknowledgement in order, for instance, to get some support. So this has been seriously taken into account, particularly at the level of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And there is now an acknowledgement about those protected area, conserved locally protected areas. So definitely there can be room for those, I would say, local initiatives. But it's a big topic, and this led actually as well the negotiator at the international level to open the range of the tools with other effective conservation measures, measures that don't have as a primary target biodiversity conservation, but nevertheless do contribute to biodiversity conservation. So there is room for initiative, from bottom-up initiative and local initiative, to say so. I will give the floor now to Mr. Eduardo Carquejero, who has some question and even doubts. So I would be very happy if you could ask your question and take the floor, please.
Well, thank you very much, Carol. Well, you did start already answering my questions I've posted here. It was with great interest that I'm following this afternoon event. But my main issue is this really this interface between policy and operational side. You're showing happily the operational side. I mean, happily in the sense that that's good that you're showing the operational side. But the main issue is that targets, these international targets are settled by governments in many of the international fora, as you have pointed out, the CBD, but also in terms of the EU by the EU biodiversity strategy. So my main question is, how do we pass this message towards the policy itself, of the need to implement effective management of protected areas and effective creating the 10% strictly protection, which is quite difficult in terms of government when the governments want to apply their sectoral policies, as we know. And the colleague from Turkey did really pointed out this main issue that clashes many times with other sectors. We know that perfectly well. So my main comment and question is how this interface, how do you think this interface can be made in order to, we can't say force, but in order to focus governments and of course stakeholders in order to create effective MPAs. That was my main issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very important question of how we can support actually the policy uptake as well. So, are there any panelists willing to address this very important question about the interface? Samantha, Zafer, do you have any advice or insight?
Yes, I could give some.
Go, Safer. Sorry.
Well, it's all about the willingness of the politicians, right, sitting on the right chair. You know, it's all depending sometimes to people, sometimes to the government, you know, related ministries. Some people come and have really big interest on this, you know, interface, trying to do the implementation in proper way, right? And for example, I have been pushing mooring projects in one of our MPA over maybe 10 years. And finally, to my very big surprise, Turkish President Erdogan, during his cabinet meeting 2 weeks ago, made a speech that we are very keen on protecting our marine biodiversity and our seagrass environment. So that's why we are just starting up 900 square kilometers mooring project, and we will replicate it in another MPAs. Can you believe this? So this is all 10 years of pushing and making a kind of policy with all the levels up to the president, and somehow I can hear this from Erdogan's mouth. He'd say seagrasses. Can you imagine? So it's all about it's all about pushing the borders, you know, as much as you can. Look at Paulo's gray hair after all those years. This is the cost of it. Believe us. You know, we are so happy diving, counting fish, you know, publishing all those data, you know, whether it's good or worse. But the other side is trying to bring the high-level people around the same table. Because for fisheries, Minister of Agriculture, for other issues, Minister of Environment, they hate each other. They don't want to sit around the same table. You know, over years and years and years, you're trying to convince them, come over, let's talk about it. So, you know, things are starting from the very beginning, bottom, from the fisher all the way to the president, but someone has to push and needs a support. You know, half of my month is just with my ties and suit, just from door to door in the ministries, trying to, you know, tell people, look at that. We prepare a, you know, MPA guide. This is so important for our future, for our Turkey has 9,000 kilometers of coastline. And you have to look at this and look at our MPAs, you know, not fitting this, you know, great results. We have to do something. You know, someone has to do all these negotiations and awareness on the high level. And right now, after all those 20 years, I don't believe bottom-up approach anymore, right? Right now, as Paulo says, this is no joke. There is no time left. We don't have any luxury to convince bottom to some very high level. We just need to convince very top. If they agree, if they say, okay, we are going to do this, and this implementation, this is the only solution up to 2030. If you would like to catch maybe tiny itsy bitsy part of the, you know, targets we already put in. Paulo, stage is yours.
Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Safer. I guess the question asked by Eduardo is the question, is the central question. And then, yeah, sometimes I'm pessimistic, sometimes optimistic, because actually the progresses and the way we're able to convince policymakers is not linear. Sometimes you work, you meet policymakers, etc., and you have the impression you are not going ahead. There is no progress in what you are doing, but we have to keep talking, to keep reporting sometimes when something is not done properly. And if I think about the decades that passed, actually, 20 years ago, the situation was totally different. We had just a few MPAs, the enforcement was new. Now, some steps have been done. We have to keep trying to talk, exactly as Safer said, to meet the policymakers, the politicians at all levels, local, regional, national, and European in our case, but also extra-European, to keep send messages, trying to convince them to look at in the long time, because one of the problems I have seen is sometimes they understand, but they are so linked to the 5 years mandate. So the 5 years mandate means that what you decide now determine the elections in the next mandate. So they understand the MPAs may produce benefits in the medium long time, but they fear to decide something strong, like to establish a fully protected area, big enough, etc., replicated enough, because they fear actually not to be re-elected. So we have to get out from this short-term perspective, and also not only speaking with policymakers and politicians in general, but also with people involved, users, different kinds of people involved in getting advantage to have a really functioning MPA. So actually, Eduardo, this is the question, because if we don't get out in the short term from this paradox, so we will keep discussing around nothing. So that's the...
Indeed. Thank you so much, Paolo. I may add as well that this is why actually our network, MPA, is developing policy activities in order to share again and again, to convey to policy arena the key messages from the ground about the needs, what it requires, what it implies. And without this exercise of sensitizing, mobilizing again and again with a tireless attitude, I think it will be very difficult. It's a never-ending process. But what we witness actually at the European level is interesting with the action plan, for instance, that is trying actually to combine, to bring together the marine conservation effort with the fisheries efforts and interests as well. And we saw how it can be tricky, complicated, but nevertheless, I think it's an interesting as well attempt to bring together and to avoid the clash between, from one side, marine conservation objectives, and on the other side, the fishery interest and policies. But it's a never-ending exercise, and this is why the more we can convey facts and figures, evidences, such as, for instance, what you did, Zafer, on the impact of the bottom trawling, on the impact of the invasive alien species. I think this is quite actually instrumental to provide evidence so that the decision maker can definitely take their duty, the decision with relevant information and understanding what it means actually and what is the reality, because this is quite, I will say, impressive to see what you did and to share this with decision makers. The information is key, and this is the role of network and the national, regional level to pass on the message. I will ask and consult my dear colleague, Katie, do we have still time for some question, or are we
Yes,
late?
thank you. We still have a few minutes. Maybe
Okay.
one more question.
Yes, perfect. So actually in the chat, I saw quite an interesting question, and Zafer replied to it, but it would be nice to share it with everyone. A question from Cyril Michaud regarding the evolution of the Mediterranean Sea as a tropical sea, as Zafer indicated. So Cyril Michaud, would you like to share your question, and then I will let Zafer sharing his answer to everyone.
Right, between the increase in temperature and water temperature and the invasive species that are coming and will be continuing to come, because in the Mediterranean Sea is not totally closed. I was just wondering, should we do like, or could we do like we did on the lands where we've got some exotic parks with exotic species? Should we have some marine protected areas dedicated to tropical species, and would it be a way to save some of the coral reefs that are disappearing in other places of the world?
Well, that's a difficult
So
question.
Zafer, do you think that the Med could become a kind of a climate refuge for coral reef or for other seas?
Well, the major problem in Eastern Mediterranean is coming from Suez Canal. Suez Canal was extended, Suez Canal was deepened, so it's higher than Mediterranean. So there's a natural flow. There is no brackish lakes in between the Red Sea and Mediterranean. So it's a huge highway right now. Every day something new is coming. And just 2 hours ago, I got a picture from, much eastern part of Turkey near Kaş MPA, a new invasive species, beautiful picture of a new invasive species. So that means more and more is coming, but we don't know how the corals will end up. If the coral eggs somehow ended up in Mediterranean, will they survive around? Because the visibility is fine. We will see, because there's, for the time being, there are a couple of examples. News appeared, especially in Israel, I think, some Acropora species arrived already, they said, but there is no kind of colonization. So we cannot do anything like this. We cannot try. It's not, ethical. It's not, I think also it's not illegal that bringing some tropical species and trying to, make a kind of coral reef in the Mediterranean. But it's all a matter of time, because there was a beautiful cardinal fish, 12-line cardinal fish. It's so picturesque fish. It was in the Kaş MPA. And I said that, I love this fish. Let's bring it to the Gökova MPA, much western, right? And lionfish will start to feed with them instead of the local species. And my wife was about to kill me. She's a marine biologist. Are you a god? Are you crazy? You cannot do anything like this. Let them, if they come by themselves, let them come by themselves. And in 2 years, right now in our MPA, everywhere, all the urchins are full with this, invasive cardinal fish, and lionfishes are also feeding with the invasive cardinal fish. But it's a matter of time. Maybe in a matter of time, in 10 years, the, hermatypic corals will settle in some part of the Eastern Mediterranean and survive the winter, because the winter temperatures in Eastern Mediterranean and Red Sea are almost identical. So we will see, but that's the trend. Eastern Mediterranean is tropicalization. It's just going on.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Zafer. I believe it's time now for Katie to give us more information about the MPA Guide resources, where we can find it more. Katie, over to you. And congratulations and a warm thank you to all our panelists, and as well the participant attendees with their question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol, and all the panelists. You're all wonderful. My name is Katie Bernalvin. I work alongside researchers at Oregon State University on the MPA Guide. And I'd just like to take a few moments here to let you know where you can find some of the resources for the MPA Guide. So this QR code will take you directly to the MPA Guide publication in Science, where you can read the full manuscript and learn more about the guide that way. Additionally, we have created a user manual for the MPA Guide, and this user manual is available on our website, the mpaguide.protectedplanet.net, and you go to the homepage, scroll down the screen, download the user manual. It's available in English, French, and Spanish, with Chinese coming soon, and we hope to have even other languages in the future. And alongside, you can also download expanded guidance, which goes into even more detail about the level of protection, stage of establishment, and the outcomes, also available in English, French, and Spanish, with other languages coming soon. Also, we would love to invite you to join the MPA Guide community on Facebook. This Facebook group is really great to connect with others who are interested in using the MPA Guide, ask questions of colleagues, meet colleagues, and also stay updated on resources, webinars, and events about the MPA Guide. And lastly, just thank you again to our hosts, MedPan, and all of our panelists. You're all wonderful. We love working with you, and we hope to stay connected with you all into the future. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Katie. It's a real pleasure to work and collaborate with you and to share more widely the MPA guide and the work done by the community around this guide. Again, a heartfelt thank you to all panelists and attendees. I believe it was quite an interesting and vivid webinar. I see still exchanges in the chat, so we definitely trigger a discussion, which is great. This is the objective of such a webinar. And just to say see you soon for other webinars and other vivid discussion. Thank you to you all.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Ciao.
you. Goodbye.
Ciao.